Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Tuesday morning for a Monster 10 game NBA slate. Before we dive into the slate, quick reminder, make sure that you're hitting that like and subscribe button down below. It goes a long way to helping me produce more content. Also, if you happen to stumble across this video, you're not already following me on Twitter or signed up for my NBA or MLB content and projections and all that good stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at BrentHyden1. My Twitter handle is in the description down below. While you're doing that, you can send me a direct message and find out how you can get access to my all of my content and projections and Discord and all that good stuff. I am offering MLB projections for this season. If you sign up now, you can go ahead and get NBA free for the rest of the season. But gonna skip right ahead to the first game of the night that we're going to talk about, San Antonio at Charlotte. I don't want to go too in-depth on this game. There are a lot of games to talk about, but this one is somewhat appealing. A 220 over-under. Game not available over on Fantasy Draft, which kind of sucks, but with MKG probable, Batum questionable, and Zeller doubtful, there's going to be some areas we can look at. I do really like some of the Spurs in this spot. LaMarcus Aldridge being one of them, coming off just a monster game last time out against the Celtics. He's been playing really well. Price is still really low. I mean, he took 31 field goal attempts against Boston. I don't see that being a thing tonight. Obviously, I'm not going to be chasing 70-plus fantasy points, but in a matchup against a Charlotte team that ranks 24th in defensive efficiency to centers, LaMarcus Aldridge, who is 7,900 on DraftKings and 9,200 on FanDuel, is pretty appealing. It is worth noting Charlotte has given up 46 rebounds per game to opponents. That's definitely a boost to Aldridge. He's averaging almost 17 rebound chances per game over the last 30 days. Charlotte really struggling to defend on post-ups, which is another boost to Aldridge, who is posting up on 43% of his attempts this season. It's more of a DraftKings play because of the price tag on FanDuel, but I really like the spot here for LaMarcus Aldridge. I really like DeMar DeRozan, Derek White as options as well. Derek White, 5K on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel. DeRozan underpriced over on DraftKings, 7,700, 8,700 over on FanDuel. DeRozan, generally speaking, going to be a little bit more consistent than Aldridge is. A high usage guy as well. It's kind of weird. He didn't have any rebounds against Boston, but he is a guy that is like third on the team in rebound chances over the last 30 days, so that's pretty appealing. And then Derek White, whose price tag is back down to like 5K, it is a really good matchup for him as well, and he's been really good. Like, did struggle a little bit against Boston, but still averaging like 1.06 fantasy points per minute over the last 30 days. That's really appealing in a matchup against a Charlotte team that just really can't play any defense. I did include some notes about the Charlotte side of this game. Some guys like, also some guys on the Spurs side, Marco Bellinelli, Brent Forbes, Davis Bertans, names to keep an eye on. I'm going to skip right along, though, just because there are a lot of games to talk about, and I want to keep this somewhat short. Boston at Cleveland. Boston 6.5-point favorites in this one, a 216.5 over-under. We did get news that Kyrie Irving is going to sit this game out. We do have Jason Tatum being questionable. Dellavedova is out. Horford is questionable. Robert Williams is doubtful as well. 6.5-point spread on this game leads me to believe that Tatum or Horford probably sit this one out. In addition to Irving, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. It will open up some value on this slate, but Terry Rozier is obviously the guy whenever Kyrie Irving is out that we want to look at. He does perform extremely well whenever Kyrie Irving misses games. Whenever he starts in this place, he's averaging almost 34 fantasy points per game. The problem is that news came out before salaries released, so sites like DraftKings were able to jack his price up. He was 5,100 against the Spurs last time out. Now he's 6,800. A little bit harder for him to hit value in that spot. But averaging over a fantasy point per minute against the Cavaliers this season. Obviously, it is a great matchup. In cash games, I have no issue going with Terry Rozier as a core option here. Tournaments, I would probably be looking elsewhere at some of the cheaper guys like Jaylen Brown, who's 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,300 over on FanDuel. He generally performs pretty well in games that Kyrie Irving misses. Actually going to pull that up right now because I remember looking at it last time. Last time Kyrie Irving sat, but Jaylen Brown, 27.5 fantasy points per game in games without Kyrie Irving. 22.3 is what he's averaging in games with Kyrie Irving. He's cheap, and a lack of rim protection for the Cavaliers definitely makes Jaylen Brown someone that I want to get some exposure to. And if we see Jason Tatum miss this game or Al Horford miss this game, there's just more minutes to go around to everybody, which definitely helps Jaylen Brown in the spot. You can definitely look at Gordon Hayward. Marcus Morris, really, really strong option. Averages 1 fantasy point per minute without Tatum on the floor, but without Kyrie, he has a 24% use rate, 1.05 points per minute. Cleveland 28th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards. They've allowed them to shoot 50% from the floor, 38% from three. That is a huge boost to Marcus Morris. They also really struggle against spot-up shooters, which also really helps Marcus Morris, who is like the team's most efficient spot-up shooter this season. Ranks in the 85th percentile. Sorry, Kyrie Irving is slightly more efficient, but Marcus Morris, 31% spot-up frequency. So lots of names to talk about in that Boston game. Not really a whole lot that is interesting on the Cleveland side. Obviously, if Horford and Tatum do miss that game, that's going to open things up, as I said, for some more guys from Boston. That's something that we definitely want to keep an eye on. Aaron Baines, Daniel Tice would be names to monitor, maybe even Greg Monroe. Unfortunately, with Baines and Tice, their minutes are generally going to be fairly limited. But again, obviously, it is a good matchup and something that we do want to monitor the news for. Looking at the next game, Orlando-Miami. Justice Winslow questionable. He's dealing with that injury plus food poisoning. We already know Rodney McGruder is out. Mo Bamba, Isaiah Briscoe, guys that are out. I hit on a few of the guys in the notes that I really, really wanted to talk about. Most of my interest is going to be in like the Miami side of this game. Sorry, the Orlando side of this game. And it's going to be guys like Terrence Ross, DJ Augustin, Nikola Vucevic, guys that get boosts in this matchup because of Miami's issues struggling to defend in isolation, guys that get boosts with Miami struggling to defend the three-point line. Terrence Ross being the guy I think that stands out the most to me, 25% usage rate, 0.93 fantasy points per minute over the last 30 days. Miami 20th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. They've allowed 38% from three. To the position, Ross, a guy generally going to put up double-digit shots, get you a pretty solid outing most nights, has been pretty good against Miami this season. And with Orlando fighting for a playoff spot, they're going to give these guys that are performing extra minutes. I'm not on FanDuel. If you want to chase some Michael Carter-Williams game, that's fine. Yeah. Good luck with that. I mean, at least on FanDuel, he's a drop score. Don't do it over on DraftKings. Again, check the notes because there is a lot to talk about, or there's some things to look at in that game. But just going to move on to a little bit more appealing spot here. At least from a value perspective, I think this is going to be where a lot of the value comes from tonight. Chicago at Toronto. Toronto 13.5-point favorites in this one. A 221 over under. Levine is out. Dunn is doubtful. Otto Porter has been ruled out. The Bulls, really, really, really bad matchup against the Raptors. That being said, guys like Lauri Markkanen have to at least be considered. 30% usage rate, 1.33 fantasy points per minute without Levine, Dunn, and Porter on the floor since the All-Star break. Dealing with a really small sample size, matchup isn't great, but we have seen Toronto really struggle against the pick and roll, or the roll man in the pick and roll. They've also struggled against power forwards over the last 10 games. Are 17th in defensive efficiency. So the price tag on Markkanen, the increased usage, the increased potential for him to put up, to be the focal point in the offense with all these guys already out. We're going to see him take 20, 21 shots, even if he doesn't get his full minutes load. He's someone that I definitely think we need to look at. 6,700 on DraftKings, 7,600 over on FanDuel. Because even in a bad matchup against a team like Utah, he was still able to put up a respectable game. He hits a couple more of those threes, like one or two more of those threes, and gets closer to his, career average shooting from beyond the arc. And he's, 40 plus fantasy points in that outing, and you're pretty happy with that at that price tag. The two guys that I think are going to be very popular, Shaq Harrison and Ryan Arcidiacono, just because minutes. I currently have Shaq projected at 35 minutes. I have Arcidiacono at 34. Even though neither one of these guys is terribly appealing from a fantasy perspective, you're getting cheap guys playing just a pile of minutes. Arcidiacono, 3,800 on DraftKings, 3,600 on FanDuel. There's your drop score candidate over on FanDuel, and of course, He's going to be a very, very popular option over here on DraftKings as well. It is worth noting 1.02 fantasy points per minute with Levine, Porter, and Dunn off the floor since the deadline. It's under a 100-minute sample size, just under, it's like 99.6, but that's still somewhat impressive for Arcidiacono, who is not someone that you generally would think would average a very high per minute mark. We have seen Toronto struggle against point guards, 19th in defensive efficiency to the position. If I'm going anyone here, it's going to be Arcidiacono just because the price is cheap, projects to be a better value, projects just below Shaq Harrison in fantasy production, but the price tag obviously makes up for that. Looking at the Raptors side of things, I would monitor the news just because this is a game against Chicago. Who knows, maybe they'll decide to rest somebody. It's always a possibility. I did hit on Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, Danny Green, someone that's somewhat interesting in the notes. I think Chicago really struggling against shooting guards and also struggling to defend spot-up shooters does help Danny Green, who outside of that Charlotte game had been playing really well in the 2 games against OKC and in the game against the Knicks. Performed pretty well. He's still pretty cheap, 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. That's somewhat appealing. I like Kyle Lowry in tournaments. Chicago 28th in defensive efficiency to point guards. They're giving up 0.89 points per possession in the pick and roll. It's a pretty big boost to Lowry, who operates out of the pick and roll on 26% of his possessions. I really like Pascal Siakam, averaging 27 points per game over the last 3 games. Gets a really good matchup as well. Again, I would monitor the news, obviously. You're going to hear a lot of people mention blowout risk, and for good reason, but there's still some options to look at in that game for sure. Moving on to Houston at Milwaukee, battle of the 2 leading MVP candidates with James Harden and Giannis Antetokounmpo taking the floor against each other. We know that Gerald Green is out. We know that Tony Snell is doubtful. I believe Dante DiVincenzo has been ruled out as well. Yeah, he's been ruled out. And Tony Snell, doubtful again. I think I mentioned that one already. But there's going to be some options to look at here. Obviously, James Harden, really good spot for him, even though my Milwaukee, a pretty solid defense. Harden coming in 42.5% usage rate, 1.63 fantasy points per minute over the last 30 days. Obviously, he's in a really good spot. Miami, a team that cannot defend the three-point line very well. I should say they do a decent job defending the three-point line, considering how many three-point attempts they give up, giving up 35.1 per game. Harden is clearly a top option here. I think I'm going to lean towards Giannis if I'm picking between one of these two. But I think they're third on my list behind someone else that we're going to get to here shortly. Although it is entirely possible that we can get, one of Giannis, Harden, and the other guy that I'm going to get to in our lineup. So that's something that we'll definitely want to keep an eye on. Anyways, Chris Paul, perfectly fine, 1.15 fantasy points per minute over the last 30 days. Milwaukee, 4th in defensive efficiency of point guard, so that does take away from him. The elevated price tag, a little less appealing for him as well, but it's still someone that I would definitely consider getting some exposure to. PJ Tucker, currently 4K on DraftKings, 4,500 over on FanDuel. It's always tough to use PJ Tucker, because he generally doesn't do a whole heck of a lot outside of shoot threes. That being said, he's going to be the primary defender a lot on Giannis, and anytime you get a defensive guy like that can notch some steals and things like that against a high usage guy, and Giannis, that makes him appealing. Milwaukee, 41% 3-point percentage allowed on corner threes. He's taking 52% of his shots as corner threes. I would definitely consider him as a decent way to get value in this game. Daniel House, someone else that we can look at as a value play in this game, would get a significant boost in minutes if Eric Gordon misses this game. I already have him projected for 32 or for 27. But he would be well over 30 in the projections if Gordon were to miss this game. And Eric Gordon, taking a very large portion of his shots from 3, has some appeal as a cash game guy. Has top 24 fantasy points in 5 of his last 10 games. As I mentioned, Milwaukee giving up just a boatload of 3-point shots per game. 58% of his shots come from 3. So he's a name to monitor in this spot. As I mentioned, Milwaukee side, Giannis 11-3 on DraftKings, 12-4 over on FanDuel. He's my guy if I'm paying up between these two MVP candidates. Giannis, 37% usage rate, 1.98 fantasy points per minute in 231 minutes without Malcolm Brogdon on the floor since the All-Star break. That's insane. That's James Harden type production. And yeah, against a Houston team that can't defend the rim and gives up a lot of points in the paint. Giannis is my guy tonight. Absolutely love the spot for him. We saw him put up a monster outing against the Rockets last time out. I mean, he leads the team in usage, leads the team in like assist rate, it leads the team in rebounding rate. Like everything lines up for Giannis to be just a smash play. Absolutely love the spot here for him tonight. But also, we definitely need to be looking at Eric Bledsoe. Houston 16th in defensive efficiency to point guards, 0.89 points per possession allowed to the pick and roll. He's averaging 1.16 fantasy points per minute without Brogdon on the floor since the All-Star break. That's basically in line with his season average, but he does see like a 2% boost in his usage. 26.3% of his possessions come out of the pick and roll. He's ranking in the 84th percentile in efficiency. So if you're not going to get Giannis, I would definitely consider getting Eric Bledsoe. It is a pretty good matchup here for him tonight. So I like the spot for him. George Hill, a guy on FanDuel that you can keep an eye on for a drop score candidate. Pat Connaughton, someone that you can at least consider in this spot, but pretty down the list as far as values go on the slate. Chris Middleton, nothing jumps off the page for his matchup, but again, someone that I would definitely not be completely overlooking if you're building a lot of lineups. Same with like Brook Lopez in the spot. Someone else that I would not be completely overlooking if building a bunch of lineups. I would definitely recommend some exposure to that game, as it should be a pretty high scoring affair. On to another high scoring affair. Clippers at Minnesota. I kind of teased a little bit a guy that I really wanted to get some exposure to tonight. He's going to be like the one guy I'm locking in my lineup. I'll get to him in just a second, but Clippers 2-point favorites in this one at 231.5 over under. Landry Shamet questionable. Luol Deng is out, and Taj Gibson questionable for this game. Harrell, averaging 20.9 points over his last 7 games, has recorded 3 double-doubles in that span, has been playing pretty well. Danilo Gallinari has scored 20 or more points in each of his last 9 games. He's someone that I did highlight in the notes. I like him. I like the spot for him a significant amount. And same for Lou Williams. Both these guys' matchup does stand out as really solid for them. Gallo has averaged 1.19 fantasy points per minute with a 27% usage rate since the trade deadline. Lou Williams, 33% usage rate, 1.24 fantasy points per minute over that same span. Minnesota, really bad against opposing power forwards, 48% field goal percentage allowed, but 41.4% shooting from beyond the arc. That stands out as really important for Gallinari, again, who has topped 20 points in each of his last 9 games. And takes 38% of his shots from 3. He's been extremely efficient from beyond the arc this season. And in a matchup against a team that cannot defend the 3-point line, that jumps off the page as a really good spot to get some exposure to Danilo Gallinari. As I mentioned, Lou Williams, also someone that is very appealing in the spot. Patrick Beverley is also interesting. The Wolves really bad against opposing spot-up shooters. They are giving up 1.03 points per possession, a 30th percentile defense. Patrick Beverley, who is averaging 10.3 rebound chances per game over the last 30 days, spotting up a significant amount. 54% of his shots come from 3, as I mentioned, against a team that cannot defend the 3-point line and cannot defend spot-up shooters. Patrick Beverley spotting up 34% of his possession does kind of jump off the page at just 5,300 on DraftKings as a pretty good mid-range option. As I mentioned, Landry Shamet, someone that we definitely want to consider as a value. In this matchup, we've been targeting small forwards against the Wolves all season long, and he's cheap. And I think in this matchup last time these teams faced off, he actually put up a really solid game. So he's someone to keep an eye on there. If he were to miss this game, you probably would want to look at someone maybe like JaMychal Green, Wilson Chandler, Garrett Temple would see some extra minutes in his spot. Now to the guy that I want to talk about, Karl Anthony Towns. Coming in, going up against a Clippers team that is the league's worst defense against opposing big men. Are giving up a league high 59 fantasy points per game to centers. They rank 30th in defensive efficiency to the position. Karl Anthony Towns has averaged 29.7 points, 54% field goal percentage, 53% three-point shooting, 13.9 boards over his last 10 games. With Rose, Teague, and Covington off the floor this season, Towns, 35% usage rate, 1.86 fantasy points per minute. He is the highest projected player in the projections on the slate, and he's someone that I'm just not going to be fading. I will have 100% exposure to him because I only build one lineup, but Towns is my guy tonight. Again, you can probably get Towns and Giannis or Towns and Harden in a lineup together if you're going to be fading some of the guys that we're going to talk about here in just a minute from the Atlanta game. But yeah, he's my guy here tonight. I did highlight Tyus Jones as a pretty solid mid-range option. I did highlight Josh Okogie, who's been playing really well in the notes, but I really just wanted to hit on Karl Anthony Towns and how much I absolutely love the spot for him before moving on to Atlanta and New York, where I'm going to highlight two options from or Atlanta and New Orleans, where I'm going to highlight two options from the Hawks side of this game. And that's going to be Trae Young and John Collins. There's a 240 over-under in this game. New Orleans 1-point favorites. We know Plumlee, Moore, Poitras, Holiday, Spellman all out, and Elfrid Payton is questionable for this game. This is a game that I would highly recommend getting a lot of exposure to. Anytime you have a 240 over-under, that's pretty darn appealing. Trae Young, 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. The price tag on FanDuel still a little bit too low given how good he has been recently. The same could be said for DraftKings as well. 20 plus points in 6 straight games, double-digit assists in 5 of his last 10. 31.1% usage rate, averaging 1.36 fantasy points per minute. Over the last 30 days, he projects as just a fantastic option in the spot here tonight. New Orleans, 27th in defensive efficiency to point guards. It's just a really good spot for him. If you're not going to get exposure to Trae Young, I would definitely consider John Collins, who's 7,300 on DraftKings, 7,900 over on FanDuel, as a really strong option here as well. He's been playing really good basketball recently. It is a really good matchup for him. Currently projected for about 6 fantasy points, less than Trae Young, but similar value as far as point per dollar goes. He's averaging 1.36 fantasy points per minute over the last 30 days, a 25% usage rate. New Orleans, league's worst defense against post-up players. They're giving up 1.01 points per possession. Collins, ranked in the 80th percentile in post-up efficiency. We know he has that double-digit rebounding, double-digit scoring upside. In this matchup, he did absolutely smash the last time these teams faced off. Those two guys, really strong options here. I also think that Dwayne Dedmon, who's been playing extremely well, comes in as a really solid cash gameplay. Rarely sees more than 30 minutes, but the matchup is really good for him as well. And he's been playing extremely well recently. Has topped 30 fantasy points in 7 of his last 10 games. So it is a pretty good spot for Dwayne Dedmon. More of a DraftKings play than FanDuel because he's center eligible on FanDuel, but where he's power forward eligible over on DraftKings, that does make him a little bit appealing. The New Orleans side, I covered that pretty heavily in the notes. I did want to hit on Frank Jackson and Elfrid Payton. Obviously, the spot is outstanding for both options. Elfrid Payton listed as questionable for this game, so that is something to keep an eye on, but he is coming in at 7,600 on DraftKings, 8K over on FanDuel. It is a great matchup for him against a team that cannot defend the pick and roll, a team that cannot defend point guards. But again, he's listed as questionable for this game. It is worth noting he does have like a 40% assist percentage without Holiday and Moore on the floor this season, which is just absolutely freaking insane. I think Frank Jackson is probably the way that I'm going to get exposure to this game just because he's cheap. He's 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. He's playing really well, 30-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games, just taking a pile of shots, getting a couple of assists and a couple of rebounds there, but here and there, but mostly relying on the shooting. But when he's taking 16, 17 shots a night and he's playing against the Hawks, yeah, it's going to be hard to imagine he doesn't pay off value here. So someone that I'm definitely interested in, projects to be one of the better values on tonight's slate. Kings in Dallas. I'll go ahead and just leave you guys to the notes on that one. It is a game we just saw a couple nights ago. I will go ahead and talk about Marvin Bagley, who is not in a very good matchup, but has just been playing extremely well recently. He's someone that is definitely interesting. Currently projected for 31 minutes. His minutes have been starting to trend upwards, which is really, really good to see. Obviously, with Harry Giles being out, that's going to be a couple extra minutes to go around for Nemanja Bjelica, who is now a pretty solid mid-range option. Buddy Hield, De'Aaron Fox, guys that I definitely have interest in. Again, Luka Doncic is questionable for this game. That's something to keep an eye on. With Tim Hardaway Jr. already, being out for the rest of the season, that's been some more minutes for Justin Jackson, who is a pretty solid value, was a good value play the other night when these teams played against each other. It is a revenge game if you're into that whole thing. He's someone that I do have interest in as a value. Didn't play very well against the Warriors. Still shot pretty well, but against a poor rim protection team in the Kings, he's very, very interesting. Going to skip over Detroit Denver because I hit on that one in the notes as well. And there's just not really a whole lot I really want to talk about from that game. Going to get to the last game of the night because this is one that's, again, I think is going to be very popular. Washington at LA. 1.5 point favorites for the Lakers, 223 over under. On the Washington side of things, Thomas Bryant, I think, is one of the best plays on the slate, especially on DraftKings where he's 5,200 and he is power forward center eligible. You can technically get like 4 centers in your lineup tonight on DraftKings with like Thomas Bryant and Dwayne Dedmon and then, 2 other actual centers at the center and utility position, and that might be the way to go. Thomas Bryant, who's just been smashing since coming into the starting lineup alongside Bobby Portis, 35 and 36 minutes, topping 30 fantasy points in each of those games. Lakers, we know, just really, really bad against opposing centers. I absolutely love the spot for Thomas Bryant. He is someone that we should definitely be considering as a great option. He projects to be an extremely good value in this spots, given the matchup. It is a great matchup for Bradley Beal, who, has struggled a little bit recently. Some of that could be related to fatigue, but still going out 30 fantasy points below. Sorry, he scored below 30 fantasy points in 2 of his last 4 games, but has over 40 fantasy points in 18 of his last 20. Still a really high floor, high ceiling option, especially against a Lakers team that is 30th in defensive efficiency to opposing shooting guards on the season. He still has like a 28% usage rate. Everything lines up for him to be a strong option here. Jabari Parker, Troy Brown, Jeff Green, guys that we should definitely be looking at. Troy Brown, 4,700 on DraftKings, 3,500 on FanDuel. You can do a lot on FanDuel if you're using like Arcidiacono and Troy Brown as your 2 punt options. Just saying. On the Lakers side of things, the spot is really, really good for a lot of these options. Rajon Rondo, LeBron James, Kyle Kuzma, JaVale McGee. JaVale McGee averaging like 5 blocks per game over his last 2 games against a Washington team that is giving up a lot of blocks. He's averaged 5.5 blocks over the last 2 games. Washington is giving up 5.1 blocks per game to opponents. And he's still fairly cheap, 6,500 over on DraftKings, 7,500 over on FanDuel. Still has monster upside. Again, has been playing really well. Rebounding upside is there. Matchup is fantastic for McGee. Someone that is definitely pretty high up on my radar if I'm going the 4 center route over on DraftKings. But I think the best way to get exposure here is going to be Kyle Kuzma, 6,700 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel. Projects to be a pretty strong play here. Currently projected at 33 minutes. I probably need to bump that up to like 35, and that would make him an even better option in the spot. But Washington just really, really bad against opposing power forwards. 30th in defensive efficiency. They're giving a 41% three-point shooting, 50% shooting from the floor. He's topped 33 minutes in 6 of his last 7 games. No reason to think he's going to play below that here. It is a pretty strong spot for him here tonight. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He's 5K on DraftKings, 5,400 over on FanDuel. As I outlined in the notes, 57% of his shots are spot ups this season. That is 57% of his shots come from 3. That is really, really important to note whenever we look at Washington, who has allowed opponents to shoot 37% from beyond the arc. In a very similar matchup like Milwaukee, where, KCP just went completely bananas. This is a spot, a team giving up a lot of 3-point attempts and a team not defending the 3-point line very well, where KCP does tend to thrive. He's spotting up on 30% of his possessions. Washington, third worst defense in the NBA against spot-up shooters. I think if you're trying to get exposure to this game and you're wanting to fade LeBron and JaVale because there's a little bit of risk with minutes for both those guys, they're going to continue to run KCP out there, or it looks like they're going to. He's a cheaper way to get exposure. As I mentioned, Kyle Kuzma, a cheaper way to get exposure. I don't hate the spot for Rajon Rondo. It's not great either. Washington league's best defense against the pick and roll. So when you're looking at a guy like Rondo, who does operate in the pick and roll on 44% of his possessions, that does kind of hurt him. But he's still one that we should be looking at in GPPs, MME type scenarios. Same with like Reggie Bullock, Alex Caruso, Lance Stevenson as value options in the spot. With Josh Hart already ruled out, we know the minutes are going to be available for some of these options. So again, Kuzma, KCP, the two cheaper way to get exposure. Cheaper ways to get exposure here, but JaVale McGee, LeBron, Rondo, also really, really, really good spots for them. But that's going to do it for this slate. There's a lot more to talk about with all the 10 games in the notes, so make sure you're checking that out. I will be back tomorrow for, I believe it's a 6 or 7 game slate. Also probably going to be recording baseball podcast tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that as well, and good luck in your contest tonight.